Okay, so the next step to our CE protocol, to this process here, what we inject within our media that challenges us to think differently, is we start deprogramming our limits. This is really where we start to say, okay, we understand that, there's a big difference between mainstream media, alternative media, and what's going on. And there's this thing called conscious media that challenges us to look deeper at things, that challenges us to bring in neutrality, and that really makes us look at things less from this like us versus them mentality, very egoic states of consciousness, and more so pulls us back and says, okay, what's the bigger picture? What's happening here? And how can I stay grounded and neutral and understanding of what's happening so we can really make a change, right? So we're going through that process, and now it's like, okay, well, I realize, things aren't really what I thought they were, and there's a lot more to us. There's a lot more to this world. There's a lot more to what I understood. Great. So where have I limited what I think is possible based on that entire illusion I was living under, or based on the fact that I thought I was my thoughts and my beliefs and all these different emotions that I have? Where have I limited my reality? Where have I been convinced that, for example, we need to be governed, that we need to have a form of exchange like money, for example, or that the world can never be without bad people, or that there's so much evil constantly in the world that's trying to get us? Why have I believed that way? Why do I believe that every single change that needs to be made in our world has to pass through this system of commerce that maintains a balance between jobs and industry and all these different little games that we've decided to play? Where have I ultimately limited my consciousness to thinking that that is all we are capable of? And the key thing here is you don't need to think about everybody else. You just need to think about yourself here. And I'm not saying that from a selfish point of view. I'm saying you don't need to worry about, will everyone else change? You just got to focus on yourself. You got to focus on, can I open myself up to the possibility that we're not truly limited? That things don't need to be a struggle, that it doesn't need to be stress, that we don't need to have all of these confines within our system. When we tell ourselves all the time that it's like, well, it'll never change. Oh, it'll always be like that. The people will always be in control. We can fight all we want. Things will never change. When we keep telling ourselves that, we keep limiting our consciousness and our state of being. And sometimes we'll justify it by saying, oh, well, that's just how the world is, and blah, 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 and all these different stories we tell ourselves. But in this aspect of our media, and what we do and what we bring to every story, is we challenge the viewer to say, in your journey, are you ready? Are you willing? You say you want change. You say you want to move forward with stuff, but are you willing to actually let go of the limits of the belief systems of what you thought was possible when it comes to our world? And what justification is there for actually holding on to so many of the things that we think are human nature, for example? Where does that idea even come from? How do we know that's all we're limited to as humans? Perhaps that's just of a current limited state of consciousness that we're operating under, where we think we have to be divided, where we think we have to fight each other, where we think we're just a mind living in this body and there's nothing more to us. Even though the piles of scientific evidence and direct experience tells us something totally different. Why do we limit ourselves so much? How can we get back to a state within ourselves where we truly see that things are possible? Whether you want to say anything is possible, or whether you want to say, well, maybe some things are possible, whatever. The point is why do we limit ourselves to this when really there's all this to play with? Or why do we limit ourselves to seeing the world like this when really we can do this and see 360? We can, a greater peripheral, right? This is what this aspect, and this is why we're always, within our media, expanding our consciousness, asking us to believe differently. The world is challenging. The world is in chaos. All these different things are happening. Great. But if media is always pushing us down and making us feel like everything's like crap and all this stuff's going on and all these things, how are we opening ourselves up? Like we talked about in some of the first aspects of this protocol, it's okay to talk about some of the things that are happening in our world that aren't the greatest, because it helps us to break the illusion. The question is, part of that conversation also has to include bringing in the neutrality and bringing in what is truly possible. What are we truly capable of? Why are we limiting ourselves to thinking that only this is possible? What if much more is possible? Why do we gawk at the idea that, people, they want to live in a utopia? Oh, they want to live in a world where we're not all bound by finance-based debt and debt banking systems and in governance and having people decide things for the majority of people and not having their best interests at heart, and corporations destroy the environment and destroy people's lives. That's all we're capable of. We could never. Anything beyond that is just a utopia. It's a false idea. Who's convincing you that that's the reality, that that's the story? Is it perhaps coming from people who buy into the system as it is, who enjoy and are addicted to the stress, are addicted to the fear, are addicted to being governed, and that don't want to take any self-responsibility? It's perhaps that's where we get our narrative from. And again, it doesn't matter what other people choose to do, it's what you choose to do. Because if you're unwilling to change, you have to assume that everybody else is unwilling to change too. But if you're willing to change and you're willing to actually be authentic and move this and bring this into action within ourselves and change the conversations we're having out there, then you assume that everyone else is open and willing to do that too. And therefore, the only thing that matters, the core to Collective Evolution's entire message, is change starts within. The only change we can truly make is a change within ourselves. As we change our individual self, we change the collective. So the only thing that matters is, are you willing to go through these processes? Are you willing to change the way you view the world and shift your consciousness? Because if you are, and you're willing to deprogram your limits, you will be adding to the collective an example of possibility that many people are not even willing to believe exists. But as you live it authentically, other people go, maybe it is possible. So this is a huge aspect of what we're doing here, and a huge aspect of what we're asking everybody going through this journey to really think about: deprogramming our limits, taking ourselves to the next level, truly being in a state of anything is possible.